Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Mastering the Interview. In today's video, we're going to cover different types of interviews that you may encounter as you prepare for business, internships, and jobs, and how you can start getting ready for those interviews. We'll go over a behavioral interview framework and best practices, and talk about how you can finish strong and follow up. Finally, we'll close with some great next steps you can take to get started with your interview preparation. To begin, we're going to talk a little bit about types of interviews. The interview process is fairly consistent when it comes to business, internships, and full-time jobs. It may vary slightly company to company, but at a high level, you can expect to submit an application and then have a few rounds of interviews followed by an offer decision. These interviews could take place in a lot of different ways. It could be a one-way digital interview where you get a recorded prompt that you have to record a video response to. You could be meeting with individuals over the phone or a video call. It could be in person. You could have group interviews and assessment. So a lot of different ways that you're engaging with employers and recruiters throughout the process. And one of the key things to remember is regardless of where you are in the interview process, you really want to be networking throughout, getting to know people within the firm, and also really establishing yourself as a top candidate in the process. There are a few different formats of interviews that you may encounter. Behavioral is the most common type of an interview, and you'll see this across all industries. This is where they're looking at assessing your past skills and experiences and how they may translate to the role that you're applying to. An example of a question here is, tell me about a time when you had to solve a complex problem. How did you go about it? You may also see a technical interview if you're applying for roles within finance or tech, and this is where they're looking to test your knowledge and understanding of a specific function, system, or industry. So for finance roles, you may be asked, how are the three main financial statements connected? This is where you'll walk through in detail and show your understanding of that subject matter. Finally, if you're applying for roles in consulting or marketing, you may encounter a case interview. This is where they'll ask you to solve a simplified business problem to really test your critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Something like your client is considering launching a new product. How much would they need to sell to break even? They'll have you break this down and walk through the process for identifying what that break-even point may be. So how do you prepare for these different types of interviews? The first thing is to really focus on your pre-interview to-do list. Before anything else, you want to start by doing your research. Look into that company, get to know the background, the culture, the values, identify areas where you may share some values with them, and really start to identify that connection between you and the company. It's also really important to look into the department of interest, the department you're applying to, and understand how that fits into the overall company as well. If you know who your interviewer is going to be, it can also be really helpful to check out their LinkedIn profile in advance so that you can get an understanding of their career path, their background, and also maybe even identify a few areas where you have something in common. Next step is starting to craft your stories. So this is where you want to identify 3 to 5 of the most important duties or skills for the position and reflect on your own experiences to identify where you've successfully used those skills in the past. You can think of experiences broadly and highlight things from past internships or jobs, campus involvement, academics, volunteering. You really want to just pick the best example for these skill sets. Finally, practice, practice, practice. I can't emphasize this enough. Meet with a career coach, take advantage of mock interviews, and use some great resources that are available online as well. So digging a little more into resources for behavioral interviewing and even technical in case, I really recommend the first stop should be our My Career website, mycareer.wsb.wisc.edu. We have a lot of great tools out there. You'll see here that there are also some other great tools available online that dig a little more specifically into technical and case interviews. These have some great techniques for preparing and also some really good practice questions as well. Finally, our career coaches and career peers. Really recommend setting up an appointment with them to meet and discuss interview strategy. You can practice, get feedback. It's a really good way to make sure that you're going into that interview confident and ready to go. Now, I want to dig into behavioral interviewing a bit more because that is the most common type of an interview that you will encounter. So, a framework that we'll go over and some best practices will really help you make sure that you're articulating your stories clearly. The STAR method is known as really the tried and true method for behavioral interviewing, and structure is really, really important when answering these behavioral interview questions because it keeps you and the interviewer focused on what really matters. I like to also bookend the STAR method with a punchline and connecting the dots. So when I say a punchline, that means a one sentence summary of the story that you're about to tell. Essentially, as the interviewer, you are giving me a roadmap of where you're going with this story so that I'm focused on what you're telling me and not trying to figure out where you're going with it. So the first two parts of the STAR method, the S and the T, are the situation and the task. This is the context, the background setting, where you're telling me what happened, who was involved, and what you were tasked with. You really want to focus on your individual contribution here and the role that you specifically played on the team. Remember that as an interviewer, I'm interviewing you, not the team that you were on. The A, or the action, I would argue is the most important part of your story. This is where you want to spend about 75% of your time really talking about what you did. This is where you're highlighting those skills and really showing how you got from point A to point B to the interviewer. Now, to wrap things up, you really want to focus on the result and share the outcome of this task that you faced. If you can quantify things, that's great, but really sort of tying a nice bow on the story with what the result was. Now, if you want some bonus points, connect the dots and tell me as the interviewer what you learned and how you will apply that to this role that you are going after. That's where I'll be able to tell that you really understand how your past experiences relate to the role that you're applying to. Some additional best practices with interviewing: show your human side. We want to make sure as an interviewer that you will also be a good fit with the company. So let some of your personality shine. A great way to do that is to remember body language, eye contact, and most importantly, smiling. This can help you really kind of keep that energy and enthusiasm up throughout the interview. Highlight a breadth of your experiences. Don't just use the same example over and over again. Pull from different things, pull from different types of experiences to show how versatile that you are as a candidate. You really want to demonstrate that interest in the role. Show that you're excited about it, and this is something that you really want to go after. In an interview, it's really important to take your time and ask clarifying questions where needed. It is okay to pause and gather your thoughts before answering a question. And you may find some instances where you don't have a great answer to a question that you're asked, and that's okay. The key is to stay calm and redirect. So saying things like, I actually don't know that I have a great example for that, but here's a similar situation that I faced that I'd love to share with you. Would that be all right? Finally, listen to your interviewer. It can be really easy to be focused on the next question or what you're going to say, but you really want to make sure that you're listening to them as they're setting the stage and also as they're giving you information about themselves and the role. So finishing up strong and following up. When you're finishing up an interview, you want to make sure that you're asking good questions. Be unique and thoughtful, and the key is to ask questions you actually want answered. So things like, what makes an employee successful? How is employee performance and feedback managed? This is showing that you really do have true interest in the role. Have a closing statement. It's always good to have that summary sentence or two of why you want the role and why you'd be a good candidate. Get the contact information for your interviewer. This is super, super important. Ask for a business card or make sure to get their full name or email address so that you can follow up after the interview. I think it's always helpful to ask for next steps to understand where you are in the process and really make sure that you're reaffirming your connection with the interviewer at the end, thanking them, revisiting any parts of the conversation that you really connected on to just really bring that connection home. So to follow up from your interview, you want to make sure that you're sending a thank you email within 24 hours of the interview. Express your gratitude, reiterate your interest, maybe give an example of something that you spoke about in your interview. After that, check your emails frequently, including your junk and your spam. This is where you're going to likely find out about next steps, so you want to make sure you're not missing that email. And also make sure to set up and check your voicemail. Sometimes recruiters or employers will call you to share next steps as well. And start to be prepared for what the next part of the process may be. So start preparing now. What can you do? First of all, check out our My Career page. We have a ton of really helpful resources out there. Consider meeting with a career coach or practicing with a career peer or fellow students, and take advantage of our mock interview program as well. We really want to make sure that you all are feeling very confident and ready to be successful in the interview process. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we look forward to working with you this year as you prepare for your interviews.